Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. If you haven't been here before, my name is Debbie and I read a lot of books. And today's book is Who Am I Again by Lenny Henry. This was a fantastic book. The blurb says, "The one phantom thread running through my story is who am I, or who should I be for the people around me? Who do they expect me to be? Son, pal, comedian?" So each time a new Lenny was needed, I jumped. That is a recurring theme throughout the chapters where he says, I jumped. And it took me a while to realise what was happening because I didn't really read the blurb before I read the book. I know, it's unusual for me. This was just... it was brilliant. I didn't really know much about kind of the beginning of his career. I know he was on New Faces. I didn't realise how young he was at the time though. He auditioned for New Faces when he was like 14, 15. And they said that they loved him, but they weren't going to put him on television until he turned 16. So he had a bit of a break after auditioning before he was actually allowed to actually go on the show. And because he does talk about, obviously, the audition and getting onto New Faces, he does talk about other people who were on it, including one of my favourite, Victoria Wood. It was unexpected to see him talking about her, and it made my heart burst just hearing about Victoria Wood from Lenny's point of view, because I adored Victoria Wood. I still adore Victoria Wood, and I was heartbroken when she passed away. Obviously he was such a staple in comedy that a lot of comedians are mentioned throughout this book. It's even in the acknowledgements, it's primarily comedians from the UK, also across the world, like in America and stuff. I think it's quite impressive. There's a section of the acknowledgements where it just goes Richard Pryor, Whoopi Goldberg, Steve Martin, Robin Williams, and it's impressive that you can put those people in the acknowledgements, because there were people who Lenny looked up to in comedy, and it's ridiculous and fabulous at the same time. I just love the people that were mentioned in this book because they were just part of his career. It's incredible. The book is done in chapters with pictures running throughout. For example, this is Who Am I Number 5, and it's just a picture, and he puts little kind of captions to all the pictures throughout the book saying like who he's with, what he's wearing, kind of analysing his own smile in the photo. It's really, really cool because I think most biographies usually have the pictures right in the middle. In Julie Andrews' books they were done a quarter of the way and 3/4 of the way to break up the pictures, and yeah, this is just random pictures dotted throughout the chapters. And then there's also, let me see if I can find it, there's a couple of bits throughout the book that are in comic form, which is amazing. He takes select conversations or important conversations throughout his life and turns them into comics. Isn't that amazing? I loved it. I'll admit it took me longer than usual to read this book because I kind of started reading it, I think it was around about the time I went back to work, because obviously with lockdown and everything I've had this in my bag the whole time. But yeah, it was just so interesting reading about his life. Obviously, you know, as a black man he talks about racism, he talks about his early career involved in the black and white minstrels, which is definitely an interesting topic to look at through the eyes of Lenny Henry. He was the only black member of the cast. He talks about how there was a bit of a conflictional feeling that he was like the token boy to say, oh no, we're not racist, we've got a black actor involved. And the fact that he also has fond memories of it, and he got along with and respected the people he was working with, so it's almost a bit of a catch-22 for him because he knows how horrible it was and how we look back on that as just being a big no-no in terms of discrimination and racism. that at the time, for him, it was a job that paid, and he got along really, really well with everybody. And so that confliction there between, you know, this is a moment on history that we can look back on and think, how was that acceptable? And yet here was Lenny Henry, who was actually involved in it, and despite everything, it was a job for him, and one that he kind of enjoyed because he was allowed to do his comedy, he was allowed to do his impressions. He talked about one night where the guy who was opening the show went off sick or something, and so he was asked to open the show, and Lenny, because he'd been watching the original guys so much, he knew the other guys' like routine verbatim, and that's what he did. He went out and used the other guy's opening, got all the right laughs and everything, ... and afterwards the rest of the cast looked at him in bewilderment, saying, you weren't supposed to do that. You were supposed to do your own thing with it rather than stealing another person's performance. So he has that moment where he's looking back on thinking like it was kind of hilarious but also mortifying, because obviously he did a good job, he made people laugh, but at the same time he'd kind of stolen somebody else's act and hadn't realised. He knew what he was doing, but he didn't. He didn't know that he wasn't supposed to do that. But yeah, he talks about like the sitcom that he did for the BBC. This finishes in 1979, so there's another book coming, people. There are mentions of French and Saunders throughout the book. At the point that this book has ended, he hasn't met Dawn French yet, and I'll admit I was kind of looking forward to reading about that, and so I still am looking forward to reading about that with the next book. I just have to have a complete section dedicated to the chapter at the end, which is Notes to a Young Comic, where he just has a very detailed list of notes to a young comic. It's not just a young comic, just a new comic, somebody who's trying to break into the business. I mean, because the advice that he gives is just spot on, I think, to anybody who wants to get into comedy. He talks about craft mindset. There's a whole chapter dedicated to a microphone and what to wear. One it's called mic technique, so it's just like the mic is there to help you, it's not there to be eaten, to bang your head against, to perform elaborate sexual jokes with, or anything else. It's there to magnify your voice and help you to be heard by most of the audience. And then it says, however, a skilled comedian will often use the microphone to make sound effects. For example, Bill Cosby. Obviously he's talking about Bill Cosby in terms of being a comedian, not everything else that came out in more recent years. But you can't deny the effect that Bill Cosby had on comedy when he started out, and the influence that he had on other people. And so, despite what's come out about Bill Cosby now, he was an inspiration for a lot of people, for a lot of comedians, and you can't deny that. I think this is a book that really puts into perspective kind of time and kind of how we've moved on and how comedy moves on so quickly. Obviously when you look at the different type of comedians out there, I mean, like Victoria Wood, she was observational comedy and funny songs. The songs were what made Victoria Wood Victoria Wood. Eddie Izzard has his own niche where it's observational comedy but through history, and it kind of borders on the, I'm trying to find the right word to explain Eddie Izzard's comedy. It gets quite surreal at times. I'm very a big fan of observational comedy. That's stuff where you can say, we've all been there. I love that kind of comedy where you can place yourself in a situation. You know, there's some comedians, people like Jack D, who are like, they're like just doing like a line of a joke and then they'll move on and then it's like another line, and you know, I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of that kind of comedy. I can appreciate in small doses. I think analysing comedy is such an interesting thing, and he does really, and he does, Lenny Henry does analyse comedy in this book, because he analyses his own comedy where he started with impressions and kind of how he was advised in the beginning of the idea that, you know, start with your back to the audience, you can start your impression, turn around, and then have that added thing of being a black impressionist. yeah, it's just so interesting to see how his career started and how it was influenced by what was going on at the time. Obviously, he talks about his experience, like with is it Tis Was with Chris Tarrant and everything else, and yeah, it's a fabulous, fabulous book. I recommend it for anybody who loves comedy, British comedy, Lenny Henry, anything to do with like comic strip presents and stuff. You'll probably appreciate the next one. Brilliant, brilliant book. It's so funny. I had to stop myself from like crying with laughter in public quite a few times. Absolutely loved it. If you like a good biography, or if you like Lenny Henry, you can learn a lot from this book. Can you tell I enjoyed it? I really, really enjoyed it, and I learned so much about Lenny Henry that I didn't really know about, and I'm definitely looking forward to the next one where he, or maybe even the one after that, where he talks about his comedy in more recent years. And obviously I think I like a bit of gossip sometimes. I'd love to know about him and Dawn French together, because they were such a staple relationship up there with Jennifer Saunders and Adrian Edmondson, and I know they're not together anymore. But you know, in terms of comedy, they were like a powerhouse comedy couple, and it would be rather interesting to read about that. So obviously I don't know how deep he'll go into that when he does write about it, but I think that is definitely something that would be definitely interesting to read about. But yeah, so Lenny Henry, Who Am I Again? Fabulous, fabulous book. I'll pop an Amazon link just in the description if you don't want to go buy it through Amazon. This is the cover. It is gorgeous, and I have to show you this book with the dust jacket off. I mean, come on. It's just beautiful. I love a good hardback book. Oh, and it still smells like new, because I haven't had it for that long. I probably had it for a couple of months. It was on my bookcase with the dust jacket on for quite a while. Oh, I love it so much. Yeah, I haven't started another book yet. I don't know what it's going to be, so it'll be a surprise. It'll be a surprise, the next one. Yeah, so thank you so much for watching. I've been Debbie. If you want to subscribe, please do, and don't forget to click on the bell notifications if you want to know exactly when I upload. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next week for another video. Mwah! Bye my lovelies. Stay safe now.